I'm looking at all these analysts, all the experts, all the writers, all the columnists, everybody. Who's going to the finals? Well, I guess the consensus pick is obviously the Heat and Oklahoma City. And then I saw little Lee Jenkins of Sports Illustrated says the Clippers are going to the NBA Finals. Lee? Do you believe that?
No, I just did it to get on your show.
That's what I thought. Good job. All right. Well, thanks for joining us, Lee. We'll talk to you next time. No, why have you bought into the Clippers here?
Well, I mean, there are a few reasons. I mean, going into the new year, they were the best team in the NBA record-wise. They'd won 17 in a row. Chris Paul is kind of famous for coasting a little bit through the second half of seasons, pacing himself. I think they followed his lead. They're really well rested. I mean, Paul has played a career low in minutes. There was a period this year where you'd have to go through the top 50 players in the NBA to get to one Clipper in minutes. So even though depth isn't as big a factor in the playoffs, even though the bench, I don't think will help them as much as it did during the regular season, they're way fresher than they were. Their chemistry is really unrivaled, if you think that matters. And they have a guy who has the ball in his hands at the end of games and knows what to do with it, as well as really anybody in the NBA.
I got a problem with Blake Griffin making big shots down the stretch. I haven't seen him take that next step towards greatness. I do like Crawford. Jordan gives you an element there. There is depth there, and you got Chris Paul. I'm just not sure, aside from Chris Paul, if I have to have Blake Griffin do something great, can he be consistent for an entire series?
No, and that's what's going to determine this for them, and if they could really upset the Thunder. I mean, he has to make those shots late in games. He has to command double teams. And really, Dan, that's what Chris Paul is looking for, too. I mean, no one really knows yet with Blake Griffin if he's going to take that leap into superstar status or if he's just going to be a flyer. And I think as Chris Paul gets closer to his free agent decision, that's why these playoffs are so important. He needs to see progress from that team, but specifically he needs to see it from Blake Griffin because that's who he's signing on to be his sidekick. They have everything else in place in that organization. He has the depth, he has the support, but he needs that number two, and it has to be Griffin.
Well, I'm surprised that you say that with Chris Paul. He hasn't made up his mind, in your opinion, of what he's going to do in his future?
I think he's close. I mean, I think he will resign, but I don't think with a guy like that, I don't think anything is really settled until it's settled, until the pen meets the paper. He hasn't said any more than Dwight Howard said publicly about what he's going to do. The issue seems like a foregone conclusion. No one really talks about it. But think if they went out in the first round to Memphis. I mean, you have a guy who's a demanding, emotional player, a demanding leader. I don't know that he would take that. I don't think it would be a foregone conclusion if they lost to Memphis that he would resign.
He's Lee Jenkins, the Sports Illustrated. He's senior writer covering the NBA. Thinks the Clippers are going to the NBA Finals. I know you're also covering the Lakers. Our poll question, should the Lakers have a problem if Kobe's live tweeting during these playoffs?
Well, I don't think they have much of a say. I mean, they're not going to drag him in and tell him to stop. I'm sure it drives Mike D'Antoni crazy, but I certainly don't have a problem with it, and I don't think they will either. I'm sure other organizations would. I'm sure the Spurs or the Thunder, wouldn't go for that. But this is the same team that brought Phil Jackson back a couple weeks ago, knowing that everybody was going to be chanting, "We want Phil." I mean, the drama is what they do. It's what they feed off, and so if Kobe's doing this during games, I think to them it's kind of driving interest in the team. They just operate in a different way, Dan, than other sports franchises today, and to me it helps. It kind of helps build interest in your brand, and Kobe's a big part of that.
As far as Mike D'Antoni's future, I know he signed up long-term here, and it seemed like he bought a stay of execution because Kobe's now injured, so you're playing with house money against the Spurs. If you lose, you're expected to. If you happen to get a couple of games, send it to a sixth or seventh game, all of a sudden, we salvaged this season. But bigger picture here, next year, Howard re-signs. D'Antoni, Mitch Kupchak said, is going to be back as our coach. Do you see all of those things playing out? Anything else interesting? Amnesty with Kobe, has that even been brought up in-house, in your opinion?
They just can't afford to do it PR-wise and as far as their relationship with him. The only way they could pull that off, that kind of trick, would be to have him get behind the idea and to have an agreement in place on his next contract and almost announce them at the same time or sort of indicate at the same time what they plan to do. As far as D'Antoni, I was a little surprised that Kupchak would say that. I take him at his word.
Well, there was timing of that, Lee, because when the Phil Jackson is itching to come back was the same day where they said, and Mike D'Antoni will be back next year.
The Lakers just have such a long history of bending to the will of their superstars when it comes to coaches. And if the Dwight Howard re-signing is based on if he wants another coach, just like Magic Johnson did, just like probably Kobe Bryant has in the past, I find it hard to believe at that point that the Lakers, won't appease him in that way. And they can't really know at this point what he's going to do or what he's going to say when it comes time to negotiate.
Good to visit with you. Always will check in with you. I know you're going to be at Game 3, Lakers-Spurs on Friday. Thank you, Lee.
Thanks, Dan. Take care.
All right, Lee Jenkins. And Lee wrote the Profile Sportsman of the Year with LeBron James, and you almost got the feeling when you're reading that LeBron James viewed Lee Jenkins as if he was part of his family. The ability, he's a great writer. I've said it before, and if I see that Lee has written an article, I definitely go to that first. So Lee Jenkins, SI.com, senior writer.